Do you believe that you're too old to learn a language? Or perhaps you're still learning, but every now and then the thought creeps in, am I wasting my time? Have I missed the boat? Hi, I'm Lindsay, a language learning expert passionate about helping you learn languages better so that you can focus on the big goals and dreams that learning that language will give you. In this video, you'll learn that age does not have to limit your language learning, and you'll learn how to put that knowledge into practice so that you can learn languages better. Before we get into it, I've got something that will help you learn a language at any age. Seriously, this is huge, hundreds of languages, almost 2,000 resources. This is my ultimate language resource list. It's so good. I'll tell you more at the end, but if you're ready, if you're like, yes, that's what I need, you can get it at the link in the description or lindsaydoeslanguages.com/list. So the way we're going to talk about this is we'll start with children. We'll talk about the advantages that children have. And then the disadvantages are, there are some. And then we'll go on to adults. And then throughout, I'm going to be talking about how we can weave this into our knowledge. I'm going to assume that you're an adult watching this, right? So let's start with children then and the advantages that children have when learning a language, because it's not just they have all the advantages. It's not, believe me. So yes, young children, especially before puberty, especially like age sort of 6 to 9, more sponge-like qualities where they're going to take more in, they're going to just easily absorb stuff, and they're then going to pronounce stuff better. This might explain why if you started learning as an adult, you really feel that you just don't have and perhaps never will have that native-like accent. And what I would challenge you on there is to ask yourself, why do you want that? Why do you need that? Because I don't think you do. Most people learning a language, we're not aiming for C2 mistaken for a native like fluency. And even if you are, it's going to be a lot of work before you get to that point. So that goal of like just the flawless accent is flawed, right? We can scrap that goal. So it is worth asking yourself, well, why do I want that? Do I even need it? And then hopefully the answer now is maybe not. Maybe I'm okay sounding the way I do. And we'll talk more about what we can do to still improve pronunciation in just a moment. So that's the first thing, that children, because of their younger brains, the way that things are, they do pick up pronunciation much easier, and grammar. They just absorb that because they don't have these rules in place. The second advantage is that if children are in an immersive environment, for example, if a child has moved abroad and they're having to go to school in the new language, they are fully immersed and they have no choice but to pick up that language. They may be mute for a while. They may be completely silent and just taking it all in and trying to understand this new world around them. So that is nothing to worry about. That will change. Then they'll suddenly start speaking and they will get it. Sometimes as adults, we see this advantage and we try and imitate it for ourselves. We think, screw it. If I want to learn Spanish, I'm just going to move to Mexico, right? And it doesn't always work because we have more intention with our immersion. We're not just put into school and left to our own devices like we do with children in that situation. No, you have a choice, right? It is an intentional choice to go out and immerse yourself in that language when you are in the country. So it is much harder as adults to just expect immersion to work in the same way. So don't worry. It doesn't have to be learn language like a child because they are different to adults. And the other thing that's a big part of that is that they have these lower inhibitions, especially if we're talking pre-puberty, teenagers starting to worry about spots and everything else, right? Oh my God, does the boy like me? Does the girl like me? Like before that age, they have lower inhibitions. So they are much more willing to make mistakes. And that is huge because as adults, one of the reasons we don't put ourselves in those immersive situations is because we think, I'm going to get it all wrong. I'm going to look like an idiot. Ironically, we kind of think, I'm going to look like a child. I'm going to sound like a kid speaking this language. But yet we praise children for how well they learn languages. We're crazy. So that's 3 advantages that children have that come out again and again. All the sort of research and the studies I've seen on this, these 3 come out again and again. Pronunciation is easier, making mistakes is easier, and immersion is, I'm going to say, more effective, right? Those 3 things. Now, when we know this as adults, we can apply those changes to our own learning. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the disadvantages that children have, because this stuff never gets talked about. We just talk about, oh my God, they're so good. But we need to make sure that we give a moment to just recognize, actually, they don't necessarily have it as easy. And these are perhaps some advantages that we do have as adults. So the biggest disadvantage that children have is that they have lower analytical skills. They do not yet know how to distinguish between one language or the other, or between the grammar of this language and the grammar of that language. So they're just putting things together. And that's where those mistakes are coming from, that higher number of mistakes, because they're kind of piecing together what they think it might be. And maybe they're filling in the gaps with their other language when they don't know. And they're more willing to do that, which is good. But it does mean that when it comes to deeply knowing and understanding the language on a linguistic point of view, they have less analytical skill to do that. So things like grammar skills, learning strategies, all of that stuff just is not a factor when kids learn languages. And I think what that means sometimes is that when we as adults think, I just need to learn like kids, it's so easy for them, I'm just going to copy what they do, we kind of don't think about this disadvantage that they have. And we just think, well, they're not thinking about grammar. They're not thinking about the strategies or the how-to. So I'm just going to ignore that as well. When we ignore that, as an adult, we're missing out on a huge chunk, because if we recognize the advantages that kids have and we try and apply that for ourselves and then add on this layer of analytical thinking and just life experience that we have as adults, it's huge. Now then, if we think about adults, that means that it's basically the opposite way around, right? So it means that as adults, our advantage is that we have more of these analytical skills, we have more life experience, more just linguistic knowledge. Our linguistic repertoire is bigger. And that just means that all the language that we know in the world is bigger. We know the word sushi, and we probably know that it comes from Japanese, right? So we know that when we're talking about sushi in Portuguese, it's probably also going to be sushi, just like it is in English, because it's a borrowed loan word from another language that we're probably going to talk about in the same way, right? So we just have that knowledge as adults that we can guess more words in that sort of sense. And so that is a huge advantage. Now, if we work backwards and we think about those advantages that children had, so we talked about the pronunciation. Now, if granted, the plasticity of older brains, like the memory begins to fade, all of that stuff happens. Of course, I'm not going to poo-poo that as myth or anything. That is true. That is true. But when we know, okay, kids do pronunciation better, we can think to ourselves as adults, okay, well, I know I have the analytical skills and the life experience to know ways that I can learn pronunciation better and the strategies that I can use. So we can apply that and we can put more emphasis on pronunciation if that's something that we care about. Because remember, I want you to ask yourself, why do I want this? Why do I need this? Do I even care about native-like pronunciation? Or am I happy sounding the way I sound right now in this language? And so if the answer is no, because maybe the pronunciation is causing misunderstanding, in which case we do need to work on pronunciation, we can be thinking, how am I going to work on pronunciation? Which is a huge advantage over a child. Then the second thing that we talked about, the second advantage that children have, is that they much more easily adapt to immersive environments when they're sort of forced into it, essentially, right? So as adults, if we want to replicate that, how can we create intentional immersion? And like I said, that does not just mean I'm going to move to Mexico and that is going to be it. It's going to be easy from there on in. No, not necessarily. Because with that, you can move to Mexico and you can stay in your Airbnb and you can just watch Netflix in English all day and only go out to the Walmart when you need to say gracias and hola and that be it, right? You need to be intentional in that situation. And you can do the same amount of language learning, if not more, when you are at home as well. When you are anywhere in the world, you can learn any language. How can I create that intentional immersion? So it's all of the kind of usual advice, right? Things like change the language on your phone and watch TV with subtitles or dubbed and listen to music in that language, listen to podcasts in that language, all of that stuff, right? Which is great. But we also need to think, Well, what about me? Regularly, throughout that intensive immersion, you need to be checking in with yourself and saying, okay, how do I feel? Does this feel good? Does this feel too much? Am I overwhelmed? Am I like underwhelmed, understimulated? Do I need a bit more? Right? So you're constantly checking in. And as an adult, you have more control over that immersive environment, which means that, yeah, we can fall into the moving to Mexico, but just watching Netflix in the Airbnb in English trap, or we can really tweak and control everything from anywhere in the world. So that is another huge advantage that we have over the children's advantage. And then finally, the willingness and the openness to make mistakes because children have less inhibitions. So yes, as adults, I'm not going to say, okay, just drop all your inhibitions. You can do it. Just go and make all the mistakes. It's fine. Just drop everything. Don't care what people think. Of course we care what people think. We have to care what people think because that is how society works. We need to have some level of that to actually function, right? So we can't just be like, okay, drop all of your inhibitions. No, but what we can do is work on something I call mistake goals. So mistake goals are where you set a goal to make a certain number of mistakes. And I love this so much because I often find that a lot of people that struggle with mistakes, with the idea of like, I can't speak yet because I don't want to make a mistake. When people struggle with that, a lot of the time there is some underlying kind of perfectionism going on that we can easily make work for us when we set the idea of mistake goals, because then we've got a goal. The thing that we previously were avoiding, we are now aiming for. And so if you have those kind of perfectionist tendencies, you can really sort of lean into that and say, hey, look, I know you're going to like this. And say, right, the goal is to make mistakes. Oh, well, if mistakes are now the goal, says your brain, then I'm going to do it. Yeah, let's make them. Let's go. Let's do the thing, right? So then you either speak or you write until you notice that number of mistakes. And of course, you may make more than you notice. That is a good thing because you've still written or spoken more than you would have done if you hadn't set that mistake goal. So just getting really comfortable with making mistakes in that solo practice when you're on your own means that when you're then with others, it's less of a big deal, right? It's less of a big deal. It is less of a big deal. So that's pretty much it. Like, we just need to know, what do children do better and how can I then leverage that with the disadvantage that children have of less life knowledge, less analytical skills? And I have that as an adult. So how can I make things work for me, knowing what I know about what kids do better? And I touched on this earlier, but of course, as we age even more from like, younger adults to kind of middle-aged to older, like elderly adults, our memory will change. The amount that we can remember, the amount that we can learn and take on and remember will change. It will likely go down. But depending on when you're watching this and when you're listening to this, there is so much research that backs up that learning a language, or languages, plural, can be so beneficial against things like Alzheimer's. And I don't know about you, but if there's anything I can do to help to avoid that kind of thing, then yeah, I'm going to do it, right? You may as well try. But then if you are at that point and you're watching this and you're already like more later in life and thinking, I'm already noticing my memory is slipping and changing, it's okay to still learn a language. You do not have to learn a language to get it to native-like fluency. You can learn a language purely for the joy of it. It increases your tolerance. It increases your confidence. It gives you something to do, to practice a hobby, a skill. Like there's nothing better. And at any age, those benefits are still there. So you don't have to feel like, oh, my memory's fading. I can't remember any language. I'm not going to try. Like, still do the thing. If you're interested, if you're curious, it is very much worth your time. And I think you're going to love it. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've got something that will help you learn languages better at any age. This is my ultimate language resource list. It is huge, hundreds of languages, almost 2,000 resources at the time of recording this, probably more if you're seeing this years down the line. And yeah, it's so good. You're going to love this. You can very easily like filter and sort and group and search. So you can find the language you want, stuff for the level that you want. You can find specific types of resources, like if you're after a podcast or a YouTube channel or a course, whatever it is you want. I just love it. So it's completely free, by the way. Head to the link in the description or lindsaydoeslanguages.com/list to get your hands on that. And as always, thank you for watching. If you found this useful, please do follow, like, subscribe, all of those things, and share with a friend. And when you subscribe, by the way, you click the subscribe button. Then there's like another bell button. You click that button, and then you make sure the settings are on. Like it's a whole little thing, like ding, ding. So whatever YouTube says, like if you just click it once, like you probably won't get the videos in your feed. But if you click it and then you click the bell, and then it's like, okay, now I know you want to see all the videos from this channel. I'm going to show you next time there's a video. So it's the easiest way if you're checking into YouTube regularly to just keep up with everything and see what's going on. All right, I'll speak to you very soon. Have a wonderful day. Bye.